Ladies and gentlemen, here in the beginning of the year 2023, chess.com spawned one of the most evil beings ever created in chess, and that is the Mittens bot. It is a cat, its chess rating is literally 1, and yet it can beat all of the strongest grandmasters in the world. Yesterday, I uploaded a video, which many of you liked. It got 1 million views in 24 hours. Thank you so much, by the way. I played Mittens, and it took my soul, okay? So what did I do? All right, like every good little sibling who just got beat up at the playground, I called my older brother, okay? And in this video, I am pairing Stockfish 15 against Mittens. Now, I made them play 2 games, one with white, one with black. Folks, these are unbelievable games. They are so high level. It's like watching 2 Avengers fighting, all right? It's Iron Man and Captain America. I mean, it's just, these games are so spectacular, you are going to want to watch every second of this video. I mean, maybe you already like to watch every second of this video, of all my videos, and I thank you so much for that from the bottom of my heart. Folks, these games were unbelievably high level. Now, make no mistake, the rating disparity is weird. It's 3,700 versus 1, so you would think that Stockfish would win in 2 moves. It's not the case, all right? You're about to witness 2 unbelievably high-level AI games, and, yeah, just watch. So the first game begins with a Queen's Gambit declined, typical stuff, one of the most classical openings in chess. Isn't it amazing that this opening has been played since like the 1800s? Isn't that crazy? And now we have 2 AIs playing on a YouTube channel, the same exact opening 300 years later. Now, Mittens gets very aggressive early. Mittens doesn't play knight f6, Queen's Gambit declined, or any of that stuff. It plays the Tarrasch defense, which is a very aggressive version of the Queen's Gambit declined. And the idea is that you are immediately trying to instigate against white center, which is very risky to do when you play black. Like, you don't want to overcommit your pieces. But it's a legitimate defense. Now we have pawn takes, pawn takes. This is a very common response to the Tarrasch. And the position that white is after is something like this, just so you understand. Against an isolated black pawn on d5, against an isolated pawn, you want to block the square in front of it, and then you want to apply pressure onto that pawn. Now, instead of that, Stockfish plays the most aggressive move, which is bishop to g5, immediately attacking the queen. The idea being that if you just trade like this, you are stripping away defenders of the black position in the long run, and that isolated pawn is going to really be felt. Now, normally, the humans play knight f6 in this position. Mittens plays f6, which looks completely deranged. I mean, it looks completely nuts to play that move. Now, Stockfish here has to choose between retreating the bishop like it does in the game, a very natural move, or retreating it all the way back to c1, and apparently that's one of the top moves. And the point is that you've just induced a really bad pawn move, and unlike your bishop, the pawn cannot go backwards. So it's a very bad move because it blocks the way of the knight, the light squares around the king are very weak, and yet Mittens plays it, which is absolutely terrifying. Now, Stockfish goes here, and this position has been reached a few times in human games, but the following move has absolutely never been played. In this position, Mittens plays the move g5. What? This is completely nuts. Now, here Stockfish thought for a little bit, and it's nuts, by the way, just because the king is so weak. You're not supposed to play chess like this. Now, one of the top engine moves here is to take the knight. What? The point of this is that you win time. Your bishop doesn't have to retreat, so you win some time, and now you can play moves like pawn takes c5 and just start immediately piling pressure onto this pawn and just ignore the weakening of the black position over here. But Stockfish plays the move bishop e3, so that bishop has now gone there, back, and back. It's gone 3 moves, okay? And now Mittens shuts the door on the center. It's like, all right, let's go. We're locked in this cage together. You and me, we're going to fight to the death. They both develop their knights. Obviously, nothing surprising about that. Always good to get more pieces into the game. And now Stockfish is like, all right, Mittens, I don't know what on earth this is. h4. All right, like, I have way more development than you. I have a better clamp on the position. I'm going to instigate and try to poke at your pawns. Now, black here has to play the move g4. That's sort of the problem when you commit to the move g5, is that very often you can't just take on h4, because what this does is it completely ruins your position, and it only helps your opponent open up theirs. So that is why Mittens plays g4, forces the knight back, and continues its very obscure development with the move knight to e7. At this point, Stockfish plays g3. That move makes a lot of sense. Bishop g2 is coming. Maybe it wants to castle. Its king is actually very safe. That's the nice thing about the position. Mittens will never break through this pawn wall. Both sides develop a bishop, and now rather than castling, Mittens activates yet another pawn and has this absurd light squared setup where all of its pawns are on light squares, and yet all of them feel very weak. Now, seeing as though so many pawns are on light squares, immediately Stockfish goes back. So Stockfish has played 1/3 of its moves with this bishop. Bishop g5, bishop f4, bishop e3, bishop g5 again. And that bishop makes a 5th move, and its intended purpose was to die. It sends the bishop into the black position so that now this pawn is in the line of sight, right? And Stockfish immediately regroups its dark squares. It says, all right, I'm actually better off without my dark squared bishop so that all my pawns are on dark squares and I have a very nice kind of repelling force against the Mittens' aggression, which is fascinating, right? Now, Mittens here could castle and everything, but if the computer plays slowly, White is just going to slowly poke holes and then win this pawn and then win the game. So Mittens just goes full turbo AI mode and plays b5. Oh my goodness, what is that move? What is going on? b5 is a crazy move. It's just a free pawn. Now, if I don't take it, if I just castle, Mittens will go rook b8. The reason why Mittens cannot play rook b8 and then play b5 is it's too slow. First of all, rook b8 loses a pawn in many lines. Check, and then I take a7, or if you go here, I take d5. So it plays b5 like this. And here the computers were just clashing in their calculations. And Stockfish is like, are you stupid? Mittens is like, no, are you stupid? And, you know, here, there was actually a deadlock between retreating and taking. Stockfish liked both moves equally. So here, I, as the human, actually stepped in. I wanted Stockfish to make this as entertaining of a game as possible. So I said, Stockfish, go take the pawn. Go wander into the black position. Why is Mittens sacrificing 2 pawns? This doesn't make any sense. Mittens is sacrificing 2 pawns because here the knight is trapped. The knight is just absolutely trapped. It has no way out. It's gonna die, right? Certainly, that's what's about to happen. No. a4. The anchor. The knight can now escape. Yes, you will lose a pawn, but you won 2 pawns, so losing 1 pawn is not the end of the world. And not to mention, moving forward, your bishop is of a far higher quality on g2 than this bishop. Why? This bishop stares into something defended by a pawn, which is also defended by a pawn. This stares at something that is actually very loose, because you have to understand it's not defended by a pawn, right? So that's the way chess works. And here Mittens makes a mistake. Mittens could have been hostile here. I don't really understand why it didn't take on b2. It must have thought that the rook could get trapped. For example, bishop b5, there's some weird positions where like queen c1 can happen. And if you do this and rook b5, then suddenly I have queen a4. It's a very, very dangerous position, which I guess Mittens just really didn't like. So instead it castled, and it ended up winning the pawn back, sure, like this. But now White is just clearly better, because Stockfish is up a pawn, and Stockfish has weaknesses it can target. And folks, I don't mean to spoil anything, but all I'm going to say right now is Stockfish at this point proceeds to make an absolute mockery out of this bot, and I mean, just watch. Like, this is like a deep sigh of relief for humanity that we do not have a new leader, okay? Like, we all still bow down to Stockfish. So Stockfish, as you know, is the best engine in the world, and it also has a sense of humor. In this position, after rook to a2, rook to a8, looking to trade and then win the pawn on b2, look at this move from Stockfish. This is such scumbag chess style. It plays rook back to a1. Its sense of humor as a computer is absurd. The point is that if you take, and I'm defended. But if you take this, I go here, and I use this, and I take the pawn on c4, and then I'm going to win this in a few moves. It's just the sitting duck. You cannot take because of the rook in the corner. Just, bro, it plays rook to a2, rook back to a1, rook back to a2, and then it's like, all right, I was just kidding. We can trade. I mean, Stockfish is such a scumbag. And then it plays b3, right? So now here's the part where it's going to start poking holes in the position. Black plays rook to a2 with the intention of bc4, queen b4, attacking the knight. And now that knight on d2, all right, that knight on d2 begins a spiritual journey. I want you to keep your eye on this knight, because this knight, from this point forward, becomes such an absolute beast. The knight travels to b3 from where it is booted, and then it arrives on c5. The knight a few moves later will make its way to the e6 square and start harassing the territory over here. Mittens attacks with the pawn, Stockfish zigzags out of the way, and in this position uncorks an absolutely devastating an absolutely devastating move, which absolutely puts the game out of reach for Mittens. Here, Stockfish sacrifices the bishop. Bishop to e4. What a spectacular dynamite shot. If you take, I play queen e4 check, then I win your knight, then my queen and my knight go and batter your position. So instead of that, Mittens allowed the capture on f5. But the problem is the bishop comes back, and now Stockfish is up 2 pawns, and the black king is in dire straits. Rook to ea3, rook to b1 zips in. Stockfish now has to have a rook trade happen. King walks to safety. King is completely safe on g2. And now we begin the demolition process. The knight goes to e6. The queen goes to c8. The pawn anchors the knight on d5. The pawn goes to d5, anchoring the knight on e6. And now I told you the knight finishes a spiritual journey. Knight f8. Threatening knight g6. But it's not over. Queen d7 threatens mate on h7. The knight goes there now. Then it rotates around to g5. I told you the knight goes on a spiritual journey. The pawn marches down to d6. Bishop f6, pawn takes knight. The game is over. The knight goes back to e6. Oh my goodness. It's finishing a carousel here. A little square of a knight, if you will. Check. And the bishop has to block. Knight takes f8. And folks, check again. And folks, the knight comes back to g5. I mean, I'm telling you, this knight was just an absolute unit. As the game concludes, Mittens realizes it literally has no moves. If it moves its queen, it's mated in a few moves. Check. And ladies and gentlemen, Mittens has been slain. Bishop to e4, check, and mate. However, was this a fluke? Let's not forget that Mittens played this game in a very aggressive way. It did not need to play chess like this, but it probably got arrogant. Mittens probably absorbed the life force of all of the millions of people that it defeated, got a little bit arrogant, and was like, I can do anything I want to Stockfish. So what happens if we give Mittens the white pieces? This game was nuts. When I was watching this game happen, I was like, absolutely just watch. So naturally, the game begins with the Sicilian defense, which is, you know, the most imbalanced opening in chess. And Stockfish plays what's called the Taimanov Sicilian with queen c7 and a6. A very imbalanced approach to chess. Like, very imbalanced. I mean, taking the light squares, but the dark squares are also fought for. Now, here Mittens plays a sideline. It doesn't really know that much theory, it seems, this bot. So it takes on c6, which is not the most popular move. And in this position, right now, the meta for white is to play queen d3 and queen g3. It looks very stupid, but the idea of this is to get an endgame where the dark squares are weak and there's no queens, and white just has a very pleasant position. But instead of that, Mittens here plays queen d4, which is not the best move. Now, from this point forward, the next few moves by Stockfish are so insane. It plays the move rook to b8, doesn't develop any pieces, just puts an eye on this, and maybe has rook b4 intentions in the future. And after the move rook to b8, it has options to develop the bishop, take the center, develop the knight, play rook b4. In this position, Stockfish plays the move h5. What? What even is that move? What is it doing? And then, after white plays h3, which, by the way, I can't even explain the move h3. I don't even know what h3 does. But it's the best move, according to Stockfish and Mittens. Now it plays c5. So we have rook b8, h5, c5. What is this? Who plays chess like this? Stockfish has no pieces developed. And so what does Mittens do? Mittens sees that black is like not developing any pieces, launches an attack. I mean, of course, right? f4, f5, you gotta go for it. You're castled, all your pieces are out. Black's just got some bishops standing around. Now here, Mittens should have been a little bit patient. It should have played bishop e3 and then, or she, apparently. That's her I believe that's what they call her. They say that Mittens is a girl. So bishop b7, instead of that, Mittens doesn't prepare anything and just goes full steam ahead, f5. And I mean, for most humans, this position is terrifying because if pawn takes f5, white takes with the rook, secures control over the d5 square, the attack bulldozes through, h5 is hanging as a bonus. Yeah, very, very bad stuff. At this point, Stockfish now moves the bishop again. I mean, it just moved the bishop once. It still hasn't developed the knight after 14 moves of play. 13. And now Mittens develops the bishop. Stockfish plays knight f6. We have pawn takes. We have pawn takes. Rook d1. Now, at this point, Stockfish starts evaluating the position as just better for black. Out of nowhere. It's just like, yeah, I've been worse for the whole game, but now I'm better. Now it plays a fascinating idea. It wants to put its bishop on e5, but it evaluates that checking the king first to move it out of the center, like out of being closer to the center, just moving it more to the edge, is actually better for black. There's not really a lot of threats. And then it goes back to e5, and it's like, well, now the king is a bit more stupid. I've kind of forced the king to the corner, and I have an idea. And I will show you that idea in a moment. Queen to c4, attacking the pawn on c5. Rook to c8, defending the pawn on c5. Check. And now, Stockfish plays the most disgusting idea of the video, moving the king. It doesn't block the check, it moves the king, and if you thought it was done, you're wrong, you're naive, it moves the king again. Why is it moving the king? Why did it move the king to g8? Why? It was completely fine on f8, there was no threats, it just moves the king to g8. It evaluates that its position doesn't need to be touched right now, it needs the king to be on g8. Oh my god. Oh my god. Mittens plays queen to b3, and Stockfish now begins to demonstrate why it was necessary to give the check in the first place, to put the king on h1, because it basically castled, but the rook never jumped over, which means the rook is still on the h-file, which means knight to g4! Oh my god, you can't take the knight. If you take the knight, you get obliterated. It's over. So in this position, Mittens takes on c5. That's not a sacrifice. If you had taken, then I would have taken this, and then I would have taken on b7, and basically the point is that once I get here, I'll get here in the future. So in this position, Stockfish plays the other idea of knight to g4. Knight h2, the arrival of the horse in front of the king. There's a fork. Now white moves the bishop, attacking the queen. The queen goes back to b8. What is going on? Look at this diagonal. What is happening here? Now, after rook to g1, the idea was never to take the bishop. I never wanted to do this and open up the rook to my own king. Stockfish goes back to g4. But what is the point? Weren't we just in this position? No, we were not. Because now I have this, and that's mate. Oh my god. Oh my god. So now white has to go here. And in this position, Stockfish steps on the freaking gas. Rook h6. Rook to d3. The rook is arriving for an attack. Now Stockfish plays f5. The idea of rook h6 was not moving the rook. It was defending the pawn against the queen so this pawn could move, so this diagonal could be shredded open, but the knight can still not be taken because of this. f5. Pawn takes f5, bishop takes f3 check, rook takes f3, and now the queen shows its true power by going to the opposite corner of the board and pinning the rook to the king. Rook f1 defends the rook, but now the bishop takes the knight. The bishop takes the knight. Why? Because if pawn takes, knight e5 replaces the bishop attacking the rook, which is pinned to the king. Oh my god. So Stockfish is winning, but Mittens finds king to g1, unpinning from the rook, unpinning from this. Now the knight is hanging and the bishop is hanging, and the game is still close. Stockfish plays bishop back to f6. Mittens doesn't even take the knight, it takes the pawn. It's now threatening discover check. King to h8. And suddenly, Stockfish has given back some of its advantage. Oh my goodness, bishop to a7, the bishop is hiding, the game is back to equal. Mittens is down a knight, but has a ridiculous passed pawn. Rook to d8, and now in this position, Mittens should have played c3. And it should have found the variation c3, queen b2, queen to g2, rook to d2, queen a8 check, king to h7, and now with all these pieces staring at your king, you take the knight. Because despite this avalanche, you are better. There is no actual threat to your king. Isn't that insanity? Mittens doesn't find that, plays bishop c5 instead, and Stockfish immediately, and I mean immediately, sends this game into an endgame. And in this position begins playing just purely like a magician. It drops the knight back to c7, inducing the move e7, and now this king, remember this king, which walk of shamed all the way over here, the king comes back. The king begins walking back to the pawn. And now black creates a blockade. Stockfish doesn't allow the pawns to go through. The pawn makes it all the way to c6, but the rook is back to h8 and to c8, and the pawn arrives on c7, and you cannot take it. Because if you do, I pin your knight to your rook. So the king continues its walk. The king walks all the way to d7, gives everybody a big hug and says, "What's up? I'm back." The king went f8, g8, h8, g8, f7, e8, d7. Oh my gosh. This is spectacular. And now Stockfish is just up a knight. All it's going to take now is for Stockfish to blockade the pieces. It trades bishops and it wins the pawn and it defends its pawn on a6. Stockfish needs to hang on to its pawns or this is a draw. Mittens is actually going to save this game. King g4. The king begins walking up. Rook to b6, paralyzing the black position. But suddenly, Stockfish has broken free. It forces the rook to go back by threatening an exchange. Zips into the second rank, zips around, and now it's going to sacrifice its pawn over here. No, it's not. Knight to e6 anchors that pawn as well. King f7, the rook is back around, the pawn slides over to a5, and in this position, Stockfish finds the fact that it can walk the king all the way around. It doesn't need its a-pawn anymore. It can lose its a-pawn. It doesn't matter. The white king walked too far. The white king got stranded on the back rank, and now it will pay the price with its life. Rook c1, rook back to c7, rook blocks the pawn on the b file, h6, and I'm not trading pawns with you. Stockfish plays g5. Folks, the conclusion of this game and the conclusion of this video is some of the most disgusting stuff that you have ever seen in your life. The king gets forced to the back rank. Now we have g4. We have h7. The pawn is a square away from becoming a queen. Stockfish forces Mittens in front of its own pawn and begins to push its g-pawn. It doesn't matter. The game is over because I'm making it down here. We have rook to g8. And now Stockfish walks out of the way because if you take... it's here, rook g8, knight to f8. The threat is mate. You cannot take. Remember, this pawn is going forward. If you take, it's mate. You are stranded in the corner. Oh my. So b6 played instead. g2, b7. And now, Stockfish plays... g1 rook. If you take the rook, it's the same winning idea. If you don't take the rook, Stockfish in this position allows Mittens to check and make a queen. Stockfish allows Mittens to queen because by force, it takes its pawn, it takes its queen, and the only legal move remaining is for Mittens to move the king here and checkmate itself. Oh my God! Bow down to Stockfish. We have one true king of chess computers, and you are watching it on your screen right now. Stockfish has defeated Mittens. Now get out of here.